pleasant morning to each and everyone. We are Group 5 and we are about to give you a comprehensive explanation of our topic, which is the three professional letter formats. This includes the letter parts, the formats itself, the design elements, the letter tone, and lastly, the common types of letter. This presentation is prepared by Ms. Aguilan, Fortish, Laureano, Paet, and yours truly. Next slide, please. Let us now begin the discussion. First, the basic parts of a letter. Next slide, please. First one is letterhead. This includes the name of the company, address, contact information such as telephone numbers, fax number, email address, and website. As you can see in our example, red, yellow, and blue company is the company name located in 7345 EDSA Makati City, and the telephone and telefax number is indicated as well as the website address of the company. Next slide, please. Date line. It is when the letter was written. There are two different ways of writing the date, which is the American way, that is month, day, year. The month appears before the day. And the British date format is day, month, year. The day appears before the month. While it is expected in a business letter to do not abbreviate the month, as it should be written out, and month should not be written through numerals. Next slide, please. Inside address. It is the address you are sending your letter to. Be sure to make it as complete as possible so it gets to its destination. This includes the name and title of the recipient, position, company name, company address, and zip code. For our example, the name and title of the recipient is Mr. John Luis N. Belches. His position is President of the JLNB Marketing, located in 1234 Maria Clara Street, Mandaluyong City, 1550. Next slide, please. Salutation. The salutation or greeting in a business letter is always formal. If you do not know the name of the person you are writing to, use dear sir or madam. It is always advisable to try to find out a name. If you cannot obtain a name, you should address the letter to the person's position. For example, admissions officer. As a last resort, you can use to whom it may concern as a salutation. And if you know the name, use the title Mr., Mrs., Miss, Doctor, and etc., and the surname only. If you are writing to a woman and do not know if she uses Mrs. or Miss, you can use Miss, which is for married and single women. Next slide, please. Body of the letter. So for the first paragraph, it should be short and state the purpose of the letter. For example, to make an inquiry, complain, request something, and etc. For the second paragraph, this should contain the relevant information behind the writing of the letter. Most letters in English are not very long, so keep the information to the essentials and concentrate on organizing it in a clear and logical manner rather than expanding too much. For example, you can start your second paragraph with I would like to. For the last paragraph of a formal letter, it should state what action you expect the recipient to take. For example, to refund, send your information, and etc. The text of the letter should be as short as possible. It is best trying to avoid needing a second sheet for most standard business letters. In any case, only write on one side of a sheet of paper and always type the letter. The only pen ink on the page should be the signature. Next slide, please. Complimentary clause. It is a short and polite remark that ends your letter. Only the first letter of the first word is capitalized. For example, very truly yours, sincerely or sincerely yours. This is used in business dealings. Respectfully yours, used in government official or anyone you respect. And cordially yours. This is used if you're close to the recipient. As you can see in the example, I've used sincerely as it is for cover letter. Next is signature block. This line will include your first and last name and often includes a middle initial. Although it is not required, you may put your title beforehand to show how you wish to be addressed. If there is no signature, there is no binding effect or not legal. The format should start with a handwritten signature, followed by the printed name that is capitalized and bold and the position. Next slide, please. So the following parts are the optional parts of a business letter. First one is attention line, written below inside address if the writer wants a particular individual to handle his or her letter. And next one is subject line. This is to inform the reader what the letter is all about, and it is written 2 spaces below salutation. Next slide, please. Enclosure or attachment. If you have any enclosed documents, such as resume, you can indicate this by typing enclosures one line below the listing. You also may include the name of each document. Next one is carbon copy notation. Sending a carbon copy letter, also known as CCing, someone simply means that you intend to send the letter to multiple recipients. Next slide, please. Blind carbon copy notation or BCC notation is used to indicate people who will receive copies of the message in secret or without the knowledge of the other recipients. Next slide, please. Postscripts. Postscript or PS or nota bene or NB. This is to emphasize something or forgot to include something in the body. And that is all for the letter parts. Let us now move on with the letter formats to be presented by Ms. Aguilar.
Thank you, Ms. Gumbak. Now let us discuss the different letter formats. First, we have full block style, modified block style, semi-block style, and lastly, simplified letter style. Next slide, please. So first, let us go with the mechanics of the letter. First is the font size. It should be 12. And for the font style, we can either use Times New Roman or Arial. For punctuation, we use colon after the salutation and a comma after the closing. Next slide, please. Now, the first one is the full block style. In full block format, every component of the letter is aligned to the left and each paragraph is not indented. So as we can see on the next slide, please. So as we can see here, the date line, and then 2 spaces below is the inside address, and then 2 spaces again is the salutation, Dear Mr. Smith, again with a colon, not a comma, and then 2 spaces below, and then the body of the letter. So the first paragraph, this is where you will mention the excuse me. This is where you will mention the purpose of the letter. So it is better to begin with a friendly opening and then quickly transition into the purpose of the letter. Here in our example, we can see that the writer of the letter stated that her colleague mentioned that the company is hiring an office manager. Hence, we can say that she is applying for that position. We can see as well that she mentioned her past experiences relative to the position, but she did not go into further details since this is on the second paragraph. On the second paragraph, this is where you state the supporting details to justify your purpose. These can take the form of background information and statistics of first-hand accounts. Here on the screen, we can see that the writer provided her past experiences in details, and she stated in details as well what she exactly did in that company and her contributions. Lastly, the third paragraph is where you briefly restate your purpose and why is it important. Also, if the purpose of the letter is employment, so it's better to provide your contact details in this paragraph. And if it is a simply letter to inform, we can simply thank the reader's time. Here in our example, the writer thanked the receiver, which is Mr. Smith, for his consideration on her application and that it would be a pleasure if she will be invited for an interview. The purpose of this letter is employment, but since the second paragraph mentioned that the applicant already attached a CV together with the letter, there's no need to include the contact information since the employer can just look on her CV. Now, 2 spaces below the body of the letter, we have the complementary clause. And then 2 paragraphs below is the signature or the sender, which is Jane Clark. Next slide, please. Now, the second one is the modified block style. So the body of the letter and the sender and receiver's addresses are left justified and single-spaced. However, the date, the signature, and the complementary clause begin near the center going to the right margin. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like. So the date line is on the right side. So it's not exactly on the right margin. It's not in the center as well, but it's between those two. And then next, still on left is the inside address and then the salutation and the body. I will no longer discuss the contents of the body since we will be focusing from now on the format. And then below, the complementary clause and the signature is aligned with the date line on the right side as well. Next slide, please. Third, we have the semi-block style. So this format is similar to modified block but has more informal appearance, and each paragraph is indented instead of left justified. Next slide, please. So just like the modified style or modified format, the date line, the complementary clause, and the signature are on the right side. But another thing about this is that each paragraph are indented. So before, the two previous examples are the each paragraph is left aligned, but here it's now indented. Next slide, please. Lastly, we have the simplified letter style. So this was mentioned to us before on our technical writing subject. So I decided to include it as well. So this was popularized by the National Office Management Association or the NOMA. This style omits the salutation and the complementary clause. However, it has a subject line written in capital letters and all lines are flush at the left margin. But when there is a listing in the body, this is indented 5 spaces from the left margin except when the items are numbered. So in the Philippines, this is seldom used. However, its use is encouraged. Next slide, please. So this is what a simplified letter style looks like. So everything is now on the left side. And then the salutation is replaced by a subject line. The subject line here is application for office manager since this is the purpose of the letter. And the paragraphs are indented as well. And as we can see, the complementary clause is omitted, but the signature is still there. Next slide, please. So to summarize the differences or the difference between these formats, they are mostly different on the position of the date line, the complementary clause, the indentation on the body, and the signature. For simplified letter style, instead of a salutation, it is replaced by a subject line, and then the complementary clause is omitted and it goes straight to the signature. Now, may I call on Miss May Pae to discuss the next topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Miss Aguilan. Now let us move on with the other design or elements of a letter. So we all know that in writing a letter, we must be able to provide a comprehensive message. And for that to happen, a letter must be well organized or structured for it to leave a good impression to its reader. Meaning to say that the design or elements we put on a letter plays a significant role in the overall impact. Next slide, please. So we have tackled this a while ago. These are the basic format or style of writing a letter. So formal letter must be written in an A4 size bond paper and must be printed as much as possible. It should also be black and white. So avoid putting colors on a formal letter, even in a personal one, because it would look like a poster. Next is that the most basic and used font style is Times New Roman in size 10 or 12, and the spacing is single space between lines and double spaces between paragraphs. Now let us move on with the design or elements of a letter. Next slide, please. So I will not be explaining much for some of the parts since it was discussed a while ago by Ms. Bumbok. But anyway, so in a letter, the sender must include his or her information in the content, including the name, address, contact number, and email. So it could look like this one at the top, where there are only two lines and all of the information are written on the second line. Or it could also look like the second one, where the sender's information is written per line. So that is what it usually looks like, but also it can be written at the left of the paper or at the center, just like this one. Next slide, please. The next one is the date. Well, it must be included because it serves as a documentation and history. So there are various ways of writing the date, but the safest way is to write it in a complete form and not by numbers. So instead of writing 12/31/00, you may write December 31, 2000. So there will be no confusion as to when the letter was written. Next slide, please. So next is that the letter must include the receiver's name and information. So that includes the name of the receiver, his or her title or position in the organization, the name of the organization, and the address. So the receiver's information is usually written either on the left side or the right side of the letter. Next slide, please. So next is references. So usually this is used in organization. So it's a code for a specific information or maybe your employee number. So So sometimes organizations provide codes for specific data. Like for example, reference number 123 for business proposal purposes. So when you are writing a letter, instead of putting the word business proposal, you just write reference number 123 and they would already know what the letter is about. Next slide, please. Next is salutation, which serves as your greeting or acknowledgement to the person you are writing for. And usually salutation starts with the word dear. So if you know the name of the receiver, you put their name or surname. But if you don't, then you can just put dear sir or dear madam. And another thing, the first word and the nouns in the salutation must always start with a capital letter. Next slide, please. Next is subject. Well, we all know what this is. So it refers to what the letter is about. Well, this one is optional. You may or may not include this in your letter because usually the subject is already written in the body of the letter. So this one is just optional. Next slide, please. So next is the body. So it's basically the content of your letter wherein you write your purposes for writing. Next slide, please. So next is the ending or the complementary clause. So it expresses the sender's regard or respect for the receiver. And the first letter of the first word in the complementary clause must be written in capital letter. And the most common one is sincerely yours or yours sincerely. Next slide, please. Next is the signature block. So the signature block is dedicated for the sender of the letter, and it also serves as a proof that the letter was really made or really came from the sender. So the signature must be in black or blue ink and usually written above the name of the sender in the complementary clause. Next slide, please. So next one is the name. Of course, the name of the sender must always be written in the letter, and usually it is written with first name followed by the middle initial if the sender has one, and then surname. Also, in most cases, the sender's name is written in bold. Next slide, please. Next would be the title or the position of the sender. Are you a student, an applicant, or a manager? So it is included so that the receiver would know about you, and it would also serve as your identity. Next slide, please. Next is enclosures. So enclosures are only included when there are pages or documents attached in the letter or if the letter is too long. So in the first page, you write ENC colon 2 if you have 2 pages of letters or ENC colon something depending on how many pages your letter is. Next slide, please. So next is postscript. So you might be familiar with this. So it is done when the writer wants to add additional thoughts or information in the letter, which comes after the letter has been written or completed. Next slide, please. So next is the commas. So commas are used in letter writing. So usually it is used in the salutation and closing part of the letter, aside from the sentences in the body of the letter, of course. Next slide, please. So next is the use of capital letters. So just like what I've said before, in the salutation, we capitalize the first word and all the nouns, while in closing, we only capitalize the first word in the complementary clause. Next slide, please. So next is the use of colons. So in salutations, aside from commas, colon is also used specifically when the letter is institutional, whether it is business or professional. And also, of course, colons are used to convey time. Next slide, please. So aside from time, it can also be used for formal references. Like for example, you are writing a letter to a librarian to borrow a book. So you put the volume or the issue number in the letter through the use of colons. Or usually in the organizations, they have codes which uses colons. And another is Bible references, which pertains to chapter and verse. So letters that includes this are usually made for religious purposes or in church settings. Next slide, please. So next is that columns are also used in book titles or even subtitles. But also the most common use of columns, be it in writing a letter or not, is for labels, which are commonly used for warnings and important notices. So that would be all for the design or elements of a letter. Now let us move on with letter tone, which will be discussed by Miss Fertich.
And now we will down with the letter tone. So writing formal letters is challenging not only to communicate the intention, but also to communicate it in the right way. So having the proper understanding or in professional tone is important. Yet the methods to achieve it or the proper way to achieve it seems elusive or difficult to understand by some of the business writers. And now I will discuss what letter tones are and how appropriate tone leads to more effective technical communication. So let us first define what is tone in writing. So it refers to the writer's attitude toward the reader, and the subject of the message. The overall tone of written message affects the reader just as one's tones of voice affects the listener in everyday exchanges. So in technical writing or informal writing, it must have the proper tone to ensure its effectiveness. And if the tone leaves the content unclear, confusing, or worst case offensive, the reader won't be able to observe or react the text or the letter you have sent. Business writers should consider the tone of their message, whether they are writing a memo, letter, report, or any type of technical document. So tone is present in all communication activities or in all technical communication activities. In technical communication, there are considered to be a standard tone in business writing or informal writing, and there are some general principles that apply across business writing. However, every business writer can benefit from understanding these um, tones, choices, and the logic behind them. And each trait is matched with a linguistic tool that one can use to achieve the right tone in conveying a message in a formal letter. Next slide, please. So we have here five letter tones, and the first one is the confidence tone. So confidence is appealing. Firms or business firms want to deals with wants to do deals with people who are confident in their business, their product, and of course themselves. To be able to achieve this confidence tone or confident tone in writing a formal letter, one must use the active voice because the passive voice is more difficult for readers to understand. Avoid long sentences with the phrase, with the word, and a comma followed by the word, and is rated in readability studies and as pleading rather than confident. The next tone is the sincerity tone, and to build a sense of trustworthiness, business writing should be sincere as it can be difficult to convey through text alone. So it can be proven with evidence of past success. So to be able to achieve this confidence tone in a formal letter, one must use numbers because numbers provide clear and specific statements that are compelling to the reader because there are cases that it is difficult to debate numbers so readers receive genuine information. So the text reads as sincere. Next one is the positivity tone, wherein positive tone is appealing also to the reader because people are often motivated and attracted to a positive take. And to be able to achieve this tone is to use praise text in a positive way, include phrases that are encouraging and enticing, and one must avoid to use negative phrasing. And also, for the fourth letter tone is the respectful tone. Of course, it is automatic that in every formal writing that it must be respectful. Business documents are read by a wide audience and should be inclusive. Speaking for and within a company demands that the writer show respect to the readers. And to be able to achieve this respectful tone, one must stay neutral, specifically avoid gendered pronouns, and using gendered pronouns can show bias and can be read as discriminatory by the audience. Instead of using gendered pronouns in the formal letters, use gender neutral terms to avoid issues. Like for example, instead of addressing someone on your letter as chairman or chairwoman, address them as chairperson or simply the chair. And aside from the four letter tones I have discussed, there are, aside from those general tones standard in writing technically, there are also tones that are case dependent, and that is the persuasive tone, which is the last letter tone included here. Because in certain documents such as proposal or bids calls for persuasive language. These tones invite the reader to be convinced of a company qualities and decisions rely partly in persuasive tone within a document. So to be able to achieve this persuasive tone in a formal letter, the writer must use imperative for recommendation, because by implying this verb form of inner writing could result to as appeal as directive and instructive, and it doesn't leave space for questioning. It leaves the reader with a clear understanding of how you envision a solution. Next slide, please. And all in all, the tone of a letter is a reflection of the writer, and it does affect how the reader will perceive the message. So the discussed letter tones that I have talked earlier are essential, because the right tone in business writing or informal writing is essential as its message. And to write a formal letter or a business letter is not a sort of guessing game, but the result of thoughtful analysis and writing strategies. So writers, one must use these tactics in writing. So they can find the right tone they need in writing a formal business in writing a formal letter. So we will now move on to the last topic, common types of letter, that will be discussed by Miss Larian.
Thank you, Ms. Fortich. Now we are on our last topic, which is all about the common types of letters. But before I proceed with the common types of letters, uh, let me first discuss the formal and informal letters, which are the characteristics or the description of what the letters we are writing and why are they called formal and informal letters. So formal letters are professionally addressed someone, so it has a specific format to be followed, and it is usually used in academe and business settings. So, formal letter purpose is to send it to companies or from the companies to its clients. While in informal letters, these are also called as the personal letters, which in which you are just sending a letter to your families or to your friends, to your loved ones. So informal letters are love letters, congratulation letters, or invitation letters. And it can be handwritten, and it has no format or specific format like in formal letters. And in formal letters, it should be typed, so it could be seen as a formal letters. Now, the first common types of letter that I'll be discussing is the business letter. So it is a formal document often sent from one company to another or from a company to its clients, employees, and stakeholders. So a business letter is also known as a professional letter, and it is usually used again in the company only or in the school, like for example. So it has its own format, as you can see on the example. So it means that it is a formal letter. And these letters communicates for example, the information of the previous negotiations that the company has talked about, or the sorry, or the business proposals that they want to talk, that they want to discuss. And then next we have here is the inquiry letter. So inquiry letters are written for the purpose of asking for something from the recipient. So as the name it says, the inquiry letters, this is where the sender asks inquiries to the recipient, to the companies, or let's say for the school about the job offers, the business proposal, the negotiations, if they could be partners into this kind of businesses, and so on and so forth. So it also, we also have here the example, as you can see, and it also has its format, because inquiry letter is actually a type of business letter wherein it is sent as a formal business letter to schools or companies. Then the third one is the cover letter. So this is a job applications outlining the applicant's credentials and interest in the open position. So cover letters are also known as application letters. In this kind of letter, the sender describes his skills, qualities, credentials, and other possible contributions he or she could give to the company or to the school. And in the cover letter, it also it is also a formal letter actually, because it is used not just in school but also in applying jobs, which concerns businesses. And then lastly, the last for the common types of letter, we have the resignation letter. So this is a document that notifies your employer that you are leaving your job. So this is the common letter, I guess, because if you're an employer to a company and you decided to leave your company, you will really need to create this one. So in this letter, you are not just saying goodbye, or you're not just informing your boss that you're leaving your job, but also saying thank you for the position that was entrusted to you. So these are the common types of letters. We have again the business, the cover letter, the inquiry, and the resignation letter, and also the formal and informal letters, which describes what kind of letters we are writing, whether they are, I mean, if they are formal or informal. So this ends the discussion of our group. Thank you for listening.